Hi there, everyone. My name is Carrie Mitchell. I'm English faculty at Front Range Community College in Fort Collins. Sue Doe, my colleague and friend, invited me to come and speak with you on April 22nd. Unfortunately, I'm going to be out of town. So I offered to make this video to talk with you a little bit about what my experience has been working in the English department at a community college for the last 15 years. So of all the prompts that Sue sent or ideas that she shared with us, I think the thing that resonated the most for me or that stuck out was when Sue said that you were all a wonderful and strong group who's wondering what you're going to do with your professional lives and how your current education may translate into various settings. So I guess I thought I could best speak to what my experience has been at the community college level so that you can start to gauge maybe whether that's the kind of experience or environment that you might want to pursue a career in. So I've been at Front Range for 15 years and I really love it. I thoroughly enjoy working at the community college. I love the emphasis on teaching. I think I had a lot of poorly informed ideas about what community college students, who they were before I started working at Front Range. And so I've been nothing but impressed with our students. They are incredible, hardworking people who tend to be up against a lot of real life challenges that I, in my very privileged upbringing, never had to deal with. So I'm always really impressed by what they're able to accomplish. They're also just so smart and they're so capable. And I don't think I quite realized just how capable they were having come from working in four-year institutions. I don't think I really understood how strong these students can be. And I would say that some of my best writers by far have been students that I've had at Front Range. And so really keep your mind open to what community college student populations are like. And I would say if you think you might want to work in a community college, definitely try to get some experience working with that student population. Maybe work in the writing center at one of the community colleges where you live, or pick up maybe one class if you're working somewhere else, just to get a sense of what that student population is like. They're really wonderful. So I'll just say that my career so far at Front Range has kind of, I sort of think of it in two buckets. One is like the first 10 years and the work I was doing, and then the last 5 years, because the last 5 years looks a little bit different. So I'll talk about those two different pieces. The first 10 years, I think, was probably very traditional in terms of what full-time faculty do in an English department at a two-year college. And so I taught a lot of composition, as you might imagine. A typical load is 5 courses per semester, usually with about 20 students in them. So yeah, a lot of composition, a lot of teaching, a lot of grading, but also some administrative work too. And so each year as I got a little more experienced, I did a little less teaching, a little more admin work. So I started out by running the campus writing center. And then I moved into doing more kind of oversight. And so I became the lead faculty member for both residential classes and online classes. So I did the hiring and the onboarding and the training and the mentoring of our adjunct faculty, really supporting that population, and then doing a lot of curriculum development and that kind of thing. And so even though that 5-5 load is a lot, as a full-time faculty member, you would take on other responsibilities that would relieve you from quite a heavy teaching load, and it would be a little bit more balanced. And so during those first 10 years, I'd say we had a lot of really exciting things going on in our department as well. We developed a writing across the curriculum program way back when I first started. My colleague Kathy Mint in the English department started that, and it's still healthy and thriving today. It's not in our department anymore, but it started in our department. But I think that's great that other disciplines have sort of embraced that writing across the curriculum program. We also started the service learning program in our department. It's also not in our department anymore, but we did start it in the English department, and it lived in our department for about 10 years until it just moved to another department. We started the Learning Communities program in our department, which to me has been the most meaningful PD that I've had. And this is where we pair English classes with other disciplines, and the teachers kind of they just kind of co-create the class. They collaborate, they synergize their curriculums. So I have worked with a biologist and a philosopher. And so I've gotten to co-teach things like intro to ethics, intro to philosophy, biology, and work my papers and my outcomes around their content. And then they work their content into my skills and outcomes. And it becomes this really amazing experience where the students get to go really deep and feel like they're supported by two different faculty members. And it really just creates for a lot of rich collaboration and reflection and creativity and all kinds of cool things. And so that's been a great program that is still thriving on our campus today. We did some work for a few years in redesigning our dev ed program. Students were there were too many exit points where students were dropping out. And so we tried to basically allow students to transfer in more at a college level and then provide them with more supports rather than forcing them to sort of take these lower level classes and work their way up to a transfer level class. And so trying to envision what that curriculum would look like, what those supports would look like, what our role would be, was a lot of work for a few years in there. And I would say that we really did succeed because we created a 6-credit model where students were taking their 3-credit English 121, which is kind of like CO 150 class, with 3 extra credits of support. And so they would be in a smaller group with the teacher getting extra support. And we found quite often that those students who were placed in those dev ed sections did better than their transfer peers who were only getting those 3 hours of support a week. And so it really opened our eyes to what our so-called developmental writers are capable of when they have the right supports in place. So that was very exciting work. And I'd say the most exciting work we're probably doing right now is on the front of it. Equity and inclusion, no surprise there. We actually are building right now a semester-long program called the Equity Academy, and I'm going to actually get trained and go through the Equity Academy in the fall, and so that's where a lot of really cool stuff is happening at the college right now. My last 5 years have looked different because I've kind of zoomed out and done more college-wide and less just focused in my own department. So about 5 years ago, I became really interested in active learning and did a lot of research on active learning. And I really just wanted to figure out, I had designed a class with my colleague, Eric, who teaches philosophy, and we stumbled upon some really great practices without really knowing what we were doing or what we would call those practices, but it cashed out in some amazing student learning. And so we really wanted to research and do some sort of meta-analyses of our course and figure out what is it in here that's allowing students to be more successful than they used to be. And we found that we were using some active learning principles that we weren't aware of. So we did a lot of research. We secured a grant. We ended up creating a pilot active learning institute so we could kind of learn more about what these active learning features of course design were all about and train some of our colleagues on them. And I would say if this is something that interests you, there are 2 books I would recommend. This one is called Learner-Centered Teaching. It's by Terry Doyle. He's fantastic. My favorite active learning quote comes from Terry Doyle. I use it all the time. And it's just simply that the person who does the work does the learning. And it doesn't matter whether you're learning to skateboard or whether you're learning to bake a cake or whether you're learning to do calculus. It's always the person who does the work does the learning. I think in my early days of teaching, I used to think I could do most of the work and that if my students were listening to me, they were learning. And my class no longer looks like that. They're the ones doing most of the work now. The other book that I would really recommend is this book called Small Teaching by James Lang. Fantastic. He's a literature professor and he does a really great job of distilling all the research, brain science, and how it is that, we actually learn. How do your neural networks form? How does long-term memory work? How do all of those things come together and produce this thing we call learning? And I think both of these authors do a great job of taking that relevant research that we have today and translating it into what does this look like in the classroom? What should we be doing if this research is true? So that's really exciting work right now. And I'll just say that we created this Active Learning Institute. We've been running it for about 4 years now. We've trained over 100 teachers and we have guided them in changing their course design from what we would call like knowledge transmission to more of this active learning paradigm, this kind of constructivist notion of knowledge where students and all community members and their backgrounds are important, and we're kind of collaboratively co-constructing knowledge rather than this more teacher-centric teacher as the, figurehead or powerful person in the classroom. So really designing your class in that way and being very strategic about how you're getting students to activate their existing neural networks and build on those, right? So using the science of learning to really help them. So I would say that this work has really affected how I teach composition. For one, I don't impose my own topics on students as much as I used to. I used to think, well, I'm really excited about sustainability and climate change action and all of this stuff. I'm sure my students will be too. And then I was always really disappointed when they didn't get as gung-ho excited about the topics that I was, kind of forcing on them. And now what I've learned from the brain science is that, if we really want to stoke our students' intrinsic motivation, we need to tap into their existing experiences and what it is that they're excited about and what speaks to them. And so I've tried to take more notice of where those moments happen in my class and really build on them. And so one example is a few years ago, I used to use TED Talks in my class, and I realized my students get really into these TED Talks. Like, they get really excited about these. And so rather than just sprinkling a few TED Talks in my class, I decided to build a whole curriculum around TED Talks. And so we summarize TED Talks. We study the genre of TED Talks. We analyze all of the rhetorical strategies that writers and speakers of TED Talks use. Students write their own TED Talks. They memorize and produce those TED Talks. We vote on which TED Talks are the best ones, and then those students end up doing campus-wide presentations of those TED Talks. And so I really just ended up changing my design such that it wasn't so much about me choosing what's important anymore and hoping and wishing that they would get excited about it too, but really watching for what it is that resonates for my students, and then building a curriculum that they can meaningfully hook into as a way to get them really invested in the course and working hard. The other big change that I'd say I'd made as a result of the active learning research and work that I do is I really learned how learning works and the ways in which our brains are limited. So things like cognitive load, how much can we actually handle and learn and retain? What is realistic? Long-term memory, how does it work? What is the effect of cramming for something and doing really well on it and then not revisiting it for a while? All of these things that happen regularly in academia tend to be very antithetical to actual real world learning. And so figuring out how learning works and really designing my class around that. I think the biggest change I've made is just to really slow down. I used to race through 5 or 6 essays in my class. I'd have students doing so many things because as the expert in the field, I had kind of automatized so much of that stuff that it seemed so easy for me that I forgot that my students, these are novice writers, and they can't handle juggling all of these things the way that I expect them to. It gets easier for me every year that I do it, and my students still come in as novice every year. And so I have to remember to adjust my expectations and give them the right amount of cognitive challenge so that they're on the edge of their comfort zone, but not beyond that, because that's when they're going to shut down and quit. And so how do I find that sweet spot? How do I challenge them the right amount? I focus way more on process work now, much less on the final essay. Rather than having all those essays, I just do a few, maybe 3. My students have to revise their essays. They have to look at my video feedback. They have to take my advice and at least consider it and make some revisions. And it is incredibly worthwhile to see my students' final essays and just get to write a couple sentences on them about how much growth I saw between the first draft and the one that they submitted as their final. We'll call it a final. I allow them to continue revising throughout the rest of the semester if they want to. And this has been a total game changer for me, because I really used to dread looking at all of those essays that I felt like sometimes I spent more time commenting on than they spent writing the essay. And so now I really push them during the process, and I get to see the rewards of that in their final product. And then I get to give them such affirmative feedback and just watch their confidence blossom and watch them try harder and stoke that intrinsic motivation to do better on the next one even more. So I'd say that my approach to teaching writing has changed a great deal. It's much more fun for me now. It's much more affirming for me. It's far less laborious than it used to be, although it's still a lot of work. We know that teaching in this discipline is always going to be a lot of work, but I feel like I get much more return on investment for that work than I used to. It's more fulfilling for me. I'll just end by saying the other thing I've been doing the last few years is working as an instructional coach. So that's a great opportunity that our college has created. Teachers, faculty can apply for instructional coaching positions. And I've been doing that for about 4 years now. So that means I get to work with teachers from every discipline, everything from welding to nursing to chemistry to dentistry to math, to writing. And what I've learned is that learning is learning is learning, no matter where or what you're learning. And so great teaching is great teaching, and student learning is student learning. And I've learned a great deal from watching my awesome colleagues in all of these disciplines do these cool things that they do in their classrooms. So noticing now that I just went over 15 minutes, which was about 5 minutes longer than I intended to go, so I'm going to cut myself off, but I'll just say that if any of this sounds interesting to you, and if you have any questions or want to follow up, certainly reach out to me. My email address is kerri.mitchell@frontrange.edu. I'd be happy to talk with you more about any of these things, and best of luck to all of you. Take care.